how can I be able to stand on the shoulders of the giants before me and allow people to stand on top of me? Because then if you can keep that going for a long period of time, well, then I think you can get to the point where you build something really beautiful and you build something that can live longer.
Land ahoy, matey!
The archipelago awaits.
So legacy's been on your mind lately, hey?
It has actually been a lot, actually. It's quite surprising in one sense, but maybe it isn't, right? So, yeah, do you want to go on that journey of legacy?
Let's do it. Let's talk about it, because you brought it up a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
And honestly, it hasn't been something that I've thought of very much, probably just because where I am in my life, like I'm
Yep.
trying to figure it out. But like whenever I thought about legacy in the past, I thought it was good like boundaries to be able to like judge how I want to live my life. But I'm actually super interested to hear how you think about legacy and what's going through your mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just sort of tell you how it sort of, well, I mean, I think it's been in the back, and maybe it's an age thing too. I think with as you get older, like the old proverb, you go to more, you're telling me, you go into weddings. I got funerals here. I got 2 or 3 funerals, sort of thing. So maybe it's about that. It's just maybe the time of the in the life calendar that I'm in. But I think it's more than that, because there's really 2 things that happen that were, I'm going to call it in stark contrast, and I'm just staring at these 2 things, and so let me tell you in the order they came. So the first one was a good friend in Calgary. His daughter got married and invited Renee and up to his house for their celebration. So that was great. So anyways, we went up there, and and they got there. Beautiful house they have, and everything come in. It's very casual. Nobody takes off their shoes. Everybody, no, it's all sort of like a country sort of setting that, you just come on in. And so I was really been sitting there observing what was happening. Lots of his family there, some co-workers, some things. But we got to sit with his parents, who we know the parents, and we were talking to them, sitting there, having their, the little appetizer things that they had. And next thing you know, there was this book on this coffee table. This coffee table was 8 foot square, and it's about the mom that's sitting right there with us. The whole book. I mean, it's a thick one, probably, 1.5 inch thick, professionally done. And it's really from the time she was born all the way to the minute she's sitting there, basically. And coincidentally, I think it's her daughter-in-law that has that kind of knack and put this thing all together. But it was very interesting because it really, kept what I call the generational view of the family. And there we were with her son, who's continuing that on. So I noticed the wall has just kind of like a wall like this, but it's all pictures of the family and everything. And so it was very interesting to talk to her about her life and get to know her even better than we do, and just through this. But then really what it was interesting after I left, and I thought, I better send him a little note after. And I said, really appreciate you inviting us up and allowing us to share, in your daughter's celebration. And but I said, one thing I would say, just, and this is how I wrote it, I said, you have a beautiful house, but what's more impressive than that is you have a beautiful home. And I noticed that generational thread there. We were very fortunate to sit with your mom and dad and that. And then, so then that was the way I sort of viewed that night. It was very interesting. I was watching it. It was a little bit unusual for myself to be in that space. And I don't know what put me in that space, but that's really what the mental space of where I was there. So anyways, I sent him a note saying that to him. And then he came back and said, Daryl, I appreciate you noticing that. I've been very fortunate. My great-grandparents and grandparents and parents have really done the work to allow me to continue on that legacy sort of thing and to build it out. And he's done an extraordinary job, a very successful guy, but very interesting. So very humbled, and he's a very humble guy. He's not saying it's him when it really is. He's very successful, but he gave credit to those that came before him of the foundation they laid and everybody that can build on it. Now, as we know, and statistically in 2nd, 3rd generations, a lot of time you don't see it's not really the building of that foundation, it's the tearing down. See? So there's one world, okay? So that's very interesting to watch, very impressive, very lucky to be friends with him, just, good guy. So, and then all of a sudden what happens is then my mom, as you know, is 94, and probably really, I don't know if she'll see 95. So this, she's had a challenging health run here. She's had a good life in a sense. But there it was over there. And then she thought she lives in like, she's in one of the homes, and she started talking about, I would like the kids. There's only 3 of deceased, and there's, maybe 5 or 6 kids left. I'd like them, for each of you to write down something, a memory from growing up. And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, we can write that down. And I said, well, what are we doing with this paper I'm going to write this thing on? She said, well, I'm going to give everybody like a paper. Now this is very simplistic. Remember, she's 94. I'm going to give everybody an envelope or whatever, and you're going to put it in the envelope. And I said, okay, so I'm going to write this thing, and I'm going to put it in the envelope. What's happening with the envelopes? And she said, well, I'm just going to gather them up and put them in a suitcase. And I said, okay. And I'm trying to follow this, right? And I said, and what's the purpose of this? And then this is where it sort of twisted. And she said, then if anybody wants to know about their parents or something, then they could read about it. So it's her attempt to say that the generations that go by, they come and they go, and there's no connectivity. So there I was watching her struggle with her legacy. That's like what, and really, economic, there's nothing there. My mom has nothing and never had anything in the sense of, so now this is it. She's on her sort of almost her deathbed in terms of her health. And this is she's trying to gather up legacy at the last minute. And this is what it looks like to her. And I was watching that, right? And so I was with Renee, and Renee was going, well, there's people can help her with that. And I said, well, this isn't really about that. I think it's really more about she's trying to reconcile. So really, then I thought about it, like what do we hear as when we, whatever parents here for or their parents here for, we can sit there and live our life. It doesn't matter if we live 60, 70, 80, 90, and then we go. And then the next generation comes and goes. And is that the journey? Or is it incumbent on the first generation, I don't care if it's in business and or of a family, because my parents would have come to this Southern Alberta area in the late 40s, early 50s, from both ends of the country, actually, from a place called Chatham, New Brunswick, and out in the coast. And so then really, what would look different if they had planted what I call a roots? And this is the thing. And what advantage would that have given or not given the next generation? So a lot of times when you see, whether it's people in Southern Alberta, and this would be consistent with any city in Canada, is that there are families there that have been there 2, 3, 4, 5 generations. And they usually, own a lot of real estate, own this, own that, and have built out this. Somebody took the initiative to really what I call root the family. And then the next generation, very likely most of them did nothing with it, but some would have done something with it and taken that route and taken another step, right? And then built that. And so it was very apparent that sitting there with my mom, there was no roots. And really the roots fall on a person like me, and my sister Irene has done a good job of trying to sort of settle those roots, if that makes sense. But it was very interesting where I see that this one, where it's 3, 4, 5 generations, and then I see the next one, and then we see it in business all the time. And when we started a little group together in business here, because the other group I was in, they had second and third generation, and it's not that they're not successful companies, but the people just have no creativity and really just sit there and go, well, I'm not doing anything more. I'm just putting my hand out and collecting the money and putting it in my pocket, and that's good. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's good, but I don't connect to that. I want to, build the legacy of both family and work. So that's really the two stark ends of the spectrum that I sort of interacted with, and it's made me think a lot. That's all.
Yeah, well, I really like how you framed it between house and home, because like if I asked you, who was the richest person in a small town like Lethbridge in the 1700s? It's like you just have no idea. You can't even name one,
Yeah.
right? But if you think about like big legacies, right? I think I heard it from Naval. You think of the people that like have changed the world the most, right? Like Albert Einstein, right? It's like that scientific discovery that has impacted society the most.
Right.
That legacy is lived on. But the house thing, the 1700s things, it's like nobody knows, and that legacy doesn't live on. But when you frame it more as the home, it's really saying like, hey, you know what, in my surroundings, in the people that I interact with the most, how can I be able to stand on the shoulders of the giants before me and allow people to stand on top of me? Because then if you can keep that going for a long period of time, well, then I think you can get to the point where you build something really beautiful and you build something that can live longer. But I think the other thing that comes to mind too, just with a lot of our conversations in the past, right? Because if you put the foundation to be able to build like that really nice legacy, right? Like take the time to craft the home, to be able to build the friends. You can put that in the best position to live on, but there's no really guarantees that it's going to live on, because it's that what comes after you that has to keep it moving. So it's almost like having, because when I think of family, right? When I think of family, it's like you don't choose your family. Your family's there, right? If we're talking
Yep.
about like bloodline family, I
Yeah.
know you talk friends and family, which you can choose your friends. So you can't necessarily control the legacy of your family, but you can be able to do your best to be able to set the foundation for it. And things that come to mind is Savannah has a friend, and we actually went to their cabin out in Ontario, and their grandparents built the cabin. And to me, that was actually just a really amazing moment. And it actually made me want to build something like that in my life, because it was so cool to like sit on the rocking chair that her grandpa built. And you could see the pride in her. Like she was like, my grandpa built it. They built this shed. Here's what me and my dad did to be able to like improve the house. And like going to that cabin and just sharing that experience with her, you're like, wow, there's so much pride here. And it really made me want to be able to build something like that can live and be able to say like, this is a place where everyone can come together to be able to enjoy their time.
Yeah, and I think I think when you said that you can feel it and see it, and I think it does. I think it's all around you in those scenarios. So you're right. There's 2 or 3 things in there. Obviously, we can't manage from the grave, which just means once we're gone, then people are going to do whatever. But it's interesting you use the term stand on the shoulders. That would tell me that people are standing tall, and then you should stand on the tall, then you'll be even taller. But a lot of times if the first generation or a generation doesn't stand tall, whether it's the choice they do, they make the news at all the wrong areas, or they don't, or they're hunched over or go the wrong way, if that makes sense. And so there's nothing to stand on, if that makes sense. So it's again that idea of who's going to make sacrifices to pour that foundation, with the hopes that the next generation or generations to come will stand on top, right? But what I can say, with no foundation, there's nobody standing on top. So it's very interesting as you go there. But yeah, that pride when you sit there and say and feel it in parents, grandparents, all the way through, and that connectivity. And sometimes you see that, maybe predominantly you more would see it. We're pretty young here in North America, but if you sit down and think about European families, the castles that have been in the system. So to me, it's very interesting, because we can't control, and nor should we try to control, what the next generation does. But it is sometimes that we actually impair them. And so let me give you an example. Like a buddy of mine was over, and he ended up on this private jet and flew over to England. And next thing you know, he was in some hunt and all dressed up in this hunt. And anyways, he was there, and he was at some castle, just 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 10th generation of this castle, all the history and all those weird pictures you always see in these movies on the castle wall. But what was interesting to him is he ended up talking to the butler. They would take him around, the chauffeur and the butler, and this husband and wife for that castle. They were the ones doing that. And so anyways, he got talking to them, and the butler and said, or the chauffeur rather said, we're 5th generation chauffeurs. So when our kids are born, they are going to be chauffeurs. And it wasn't said necessarily proudly. It was saying, we have no opportunity, so this is what we're going to do. So this buddy of mine who lives out in rural Saskatchewan said, well, maybe you could come to Canada. He goes, tell you what, that's what the guy offered. He said, I will come, me and my wife will come, and we will be your butler and chauffeur, with one condition. You pay for our kids to go to school. We're not worried about what we make. Put them in school so we can break this cycle. And so he said, well, I don't know if being in rural Saskatchewan, you driving as chauffeur might fly. We'll have to call you something else, because his farming buddies and all these people would go, what, you got a chauffeur? Like what? Like, who the hell do you think you are? But it was very interesting. He's saying, I want to break the cycle. So I'm willing to sacrifice ourselves and what we do if you could position our kids. So that's what he noticed in his description when I was talking to him. We spent at length talking about this, is that these families give their kids the best educations, the best foundations, the best things to continue on so that they have a statistical chance. Versus, you're right, and even then they could, fall off the cliff. But with that foundation of education, thought process, economic starting points, then usually they have a better than average chance to continue that on in some format. So very interesting to think, not today where I sit, but 100 years long after I'm gone, what did we leave other than, I'm not saying, and I see this, like I know I had two people here, that pass away, their parents pass away, and and the one guy said, it was interesting. He sat in the very chair you sat in. He just said, yeah, my dad's going away, and he's got his house is worth like 500,000, so we're going to sell it and give it to the kids. There's 4 boys, and they're going to take it. And then one boy, he said, he's going to spend it as fast as he gets it, so we're going to tell him that it isn't there and just give him some money every couple of weeks. But the other one's like, well, yeah, they're going to be going on trips to Europe. And so that's right there. He's telling it, the legacy is just, as soon as that house is gone, it's dispersed. And there it is. Versus saying, we will use that as a foundation to build off of, or that money means nothing to any of us because we've got this foundation that they have set up. So you can see the difference in mentality of how, people die, they get an inheritance. They just, most of the time, sift through it very quick. It'll materially temporarily change their life, but it doesn't lay more roots. It actually pulls up those roots.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of the difference between like family inheritance and corporate inheritance. Because if you think of the big public companies, right, you think of Steve Jobs, like who inherited Apple? Well, Tim Cook, right?
Yep.
Because they said, you know what, Tim Cook is the best person to be able to run the company. It's not necessarily like Steve Jobs' son is going to take over and run the company because, I don't know if he exists, but if he did exist, like he's just not the best person in that situation to be able to run the company. Right? Especially if you think of like Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway right now. Well, they've been grooming the person under them for years and years and years to be able to step up and be able to run the company. So they're finding the right person to be able to continue the legacy of the company. But then you overlay that with the legacy of family, and you don't have necessarily that luxury, right? Like you don't have that person to say, like if he's selling his house and say it's $500,000, it's like, you know what? We're actually going to not do that. We're going to invest it all. We're not going to give it to the children. We're going to invest it in the children so they can give it to their children.
Yep.
And sure, it's going to be a little bit of a sacrifice today, but we're setting up the next generation, right? It's not like you get to choose the person with that mentality or get to necessarily choose that. But I guess you do have some control if you situate your financial position or like the things that you build, if you're thinking about it far enough ahead of time.
Exactly.
Right? And I think that's the situation where you're at right now, is now you're sitting here thinking farther ahead and saying like, okay, well, how do I want to load that spring so when the next person comes up, it gives them the actual best chance, or statistically, like you said, statistically the best position for them to be able to better themselves.
Yeah, and I think it was funny when you're saying that sometimes what would they say? They have the right last name but the wrong skill set. So that's why in corporations, whatever, they say, well, the son is, or somebody's son or daughter is going to take, and you're like, and everybody rolls their eyes a bit. I mean, we've all watched whatever Tommy Boy or whatever goofy shows that where that comes in and it's just a train wreck at start. But yeah, but it's interesting. So you're right. So we say that normally we don't have that person. That's really from preparedness, because I would argue that those generational families do have that. They already have the people already in place. They're all well versed on what's going to happen, and then they take those steps to happen. So those are the ones that control that wealth, build that wealth, and continue it on. Where the average family, they just go, oh, mom or dad died, or they died. Okay, do I get anything? What is it? Good, it's gone, and that's it. Great. And then guess what's going to happen? They're going to go down the road. They're going to have their end date, and they'll get something, don't get something. Okay, next, and then it just continues. So it's not that they're in poverty. It's not an extreme that way, but they're not in prosperity. I'd say it's just this continuation that where other families go, build. And so that's why when you come to any place, you go, well, who owns all that? Who owns all that? Oh, that's that family. They've been around for 100 years, or bridges are named after them, or whatever the case. So you see that it's very interesting that it wasn't random. It just somebody had to do it at some point, and whether they took those steps. And I'm not talking just, oh yeah, you're talking like they have the will done or success. No, that's the same as the transfer. I'm talking about more of a wealth setup, if that makes sense. It's very rare that you would see that, but you would see that normally in families that are sort of more sort of established. But it's very interesting that if you're the one establishing the business, because you're a founder, I'm a founder of the business, and then what are we doing to make sure it has its longevity long after us? And I know it's a weird conversation. You're going, come on, Daryl, lighten up. You know, I'm not an old man like you sort of idea, but it really is about more of a mindset is what I'm saying, is that are we stewards of the assets and the money we have, or do we think it owes us something? So I get $1 and I have to do something because it's mine, versus, no, I'm just a steward of this thing. And it's going to, once, I need to live, but beyond that, then it's just building. It's just like the company. The company needs to pay its people. But beyond that, when it really cooks, then it'll build. And then what's happening with that, and what's that mindset is really what I'm talking about. So it's very interesting to watch, like I said, those two contrasting ones. One is executing it just flawlessly, and the other one was on deathbed saying, there's an envelope in the thing, and no disrespect to my mom, I love my mom, but it's just saying, no chance on earth. That should have been done through the sacrifices of the first generation, or maybe the second, but it can't be done when I got a week or two or a month or 2 years, less than a year to live. I'm going to start it now.
Yeah. What's wrestling through my mind right now is like, so the company makes a lot of sense to me, right? Like being able to like set the legacy of the company, I feel like is something I can control. So it feels like I can find people with similar mentalities. I can be able to like really instill, like we talked about, the values and the philosophies behind the company to be able to attract the right people, to be able to have that grow farther than me, right? So if theoretically I should be able to step away from the company and it should be able to carry the values, the legacy, and be able to deliver the value without me, right? Like that makes a ton of sense to me. The thing that I'm wrestling with in my mind right now is if I try to say like, if I'm thinking about like the 10th generation of Howries or the next generation of Howries, it's like, can I manage that? It's like, I can set them up, because you said, like you mentioned, I liked your quote, managing from the grave, you can't do that. But it's like, even if I'm thinking about like, say, like this is the 10th generation of the castle we have, like, can you manage that? Or is it just something that you have to set up, and then is it more of a path that you hope
keep your fingers
follow?
crossed? Yeah. Well, again, like they always say, hope is not a strategy. But it's very interesting with business. So in business, if I said to you, okay, let's talk about that. Let's say we're building the first one and that we are trying to do continuity. So the first thing you might say, okay, Daryl, how do you see that in the business, Epiphany Group? How do you see that? Well, I'd say we got a board of directors. And you go, that's interesting. But that's a business because you have a board of directors. Okay. And then we tell the story. We pay homage to the years of sacrifice and us trying to build it. Those are two inherent things. People that are sort of independent in the sense of us, but also just are in tune with what we're doing. And then the second one is embracing the history. So now let's just overlay that on family. So I want you to visualize something that, again, that guy that went over, Joe, Buddy Joe from Moose Jaw. So it was very interesting because he said, you know what, he has a company, like his is a financial company, but he has this other company. And he took his two daughters, and they were 12 and 13 at the time, and they formed the board. They formed the board of this company. Now think about that for a minute. So what they do is they have quarterly board meetings. They talk about, do they have enough money or not money? What's going good? What's not going good? So he's treating his family like a conglomerate, or like a big corporation. So very interesting that if you said to imagine this would seem a little weird, instead of saying, oh, once a quarter we're going to get together, but we're going to talk about the history of the family. We're going to talk about what we've been blessed to have and what we're going to try to do with what we have and how we're going to stay true to that and be stewards of that. Now imagine that conversation over 20 or 30 years. So imagine I want you, because we're in different spots, I have children, you don't, but I want you to think if your parents had done that with you, and imagine if I do that with the kids I have, then what courage would that look like if we added 10, 20 years of consistency on that? would it give a chance, do you think?
Well, I feel like it would be baked into my thought process and my personality. Because even in like one philosophy that my dad taught me is like a man's only as good as his word, right?
Yep.
Like that's something he's told me
Yep.
since I've been little.
Yep.
So that's just something that I just like I live on today. I don't even have to think about it, right?
Right.
Like a handshake is good as a signature.
Yep.
To me, that's just what it is.
That's exactly it. Yep.
So it's like a similar philosophy is like
Exactly.
if you're sitting there and you're saying like if I was 8 years old, 13 years old, and we're thinking about like the generation of the family,
Right.
well, it's a completely different mindset.
Right. And so then let me ask another question in that same thought. So let's say that you're the 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, and you're getting, and of course, when you're 8, 10, 12, you don't know. And even when you're 20, you don't know what you know when you're 30 and all the way through. But just explain like your view then of when we see TikTok wealth, like Mercedes and, money and yachts and everything versus stewards of the money if you were doing that. Like think about the true understanding, right? So
Yeah, well, I think the statistic is I think I read the book The Millionaire Next Door, and it's most millionaires drive Toyota Corollas and live in the house down the street
Exactly.
versus you see them on social media.
100% stewards of the money. That's really it versus this idea. So these people would be grounded in that understanding. Now, I'm not to suggest, it doesn't mean that somebody can't go off the rail to do whatever they do for whatever reason they do. But it's just saying, what if we use it as education, if we say that's the base of education for the family, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to graduate from, quote, university of the family education, but they at least have a chance. They're not, it's not the opposite where they don't see any of that. Right. So I think I might have told you the story, but I'll tell you the story about my Uncle Bert, who is the youngest of 13 kids of my dad's family. So I got to know my Uncle Bert later in life, and probably when I met him when he was late 60s. And he turned out to be, I had a closer relationship than I ever did with my dad. So he became like a surrogate dad to me. But it was very interesting talking to him about his life, and grew up in New Brunswick and then went to, Laval or whatever down east. But he ended up in Texas when he was telling me about his journey. And so then he told me this story that I just about fell off the chair the one time. So he said, so there he was, and he was doing this job, and he was a minister of the church, but then he also had another sort of phase. He was this administration guy for all the hospitals or whatever. So we had all these different ones. But then his wife got sick, and anyways, they moved to a different thing. So anyways, he ended up working at one window in Sears, Roebuck, Simpson Sears, of the big store. And anyways, and he was always a very friendly guy, and very, he could fix anything, do anything, very like that sort of hands-on type of guy. And anyways, this older guy used to come in all the time because he'd buy wash machines or machines, and my Uncle Bert would help him out anyway. So this would be now, we were talking in the, mid to late 70s. And this guy approached my uncle and said, I was wondering if you would want to take over all my real estate. Now visualize this. And so now I'm sitting up in the chair when Bert's telling me his story, and I'm like, and he's going, look, I have no heirs, I got nobody, and I have all these rental properties, and you've always been very good, and you're a friend of mine, and I think this would be very good for you and your family, right? So my uncle at that time would have been, doing the math, probably maybe within 5 or 10 years of you sort of idea, 30 to 40 years old. And then my uncle said to him, well, I wouldn't have the money to do that. I'm working at Sears. And he goes, no, I'll make it happen for you. You don't have to worry about that. I'll make it and set you up, and everything will be good. So then I'm thinking, holy smokes.
Yeah.
And then my uncle says to me, yeah, I didn't do it. And I said, what? What do you mean you didn't do it? And he goes, look, I had nobody to run this by. I didn't have, like me and you, the conversation we're having, Daryl. My mom was alive. My dad had been long deceased. They didn't have this kind of economic thing. There was nobody that I didn't. So think about the practical education of that. Think about if that was an opportunity, that if it fell in your lap today. Think about the difference, or fell in my lap today. But he turned it down, and I was like, and what would it, now, I'm not saying that economics are everything, but if we're talking about foundation of family, what path would that have been different? Where the guy's actually saying, I'm giving it to you, but he had it was so foreign to him. So what can we make so that it's not foreign to every generation? that they understand that we are just here, whether it's the land, whether it's the dollars, we're just stewards of this thing. It's, you can't take it with you in the grave. You're not gonna, fill my casket full of dollars. It's just, you don't. So really, what are we doing this for, in a sense, other than living our lives? And so to me, I think we rob those generations by not doing the exact same thing we do in business, which is just, when you bring somebody in the company, you don't go, okay, we're not telling you anything about the company. We're not telling you what we want to do. And we've talked about visions, values, all that. We tell them the story of how we got here, what we're trying to accomplish, what we're trying to do, where we want to go. So we do that, and we reinforce it, quarterly, everything. It's on our walls, everything. We just reinforce it. So verse it now in our families. Can you think of a family, yourself, that that has done anything according to that, in that range of stuff?
Well, no, and that's what's actually been going through my mind too, is like, what would that look like? What would that structure look like, right? Because I think it is super interesting, because you would it gives you a framework and a process to be able to follow as a family, to be able to build like a generational family, like you're saying. Because like all the principles are like, you're talking about the principles, storytelling. Yep. It's about being able to create the emotional connection to what was there and what's there before you.
Yep.
It's being able to paint the picture of where you want to go to be able to inspire people. And it's like building, it's like, what are those, again, the human nature, what are those fundamentals of human nature that actually make us excited to be able to chase after the thing that we're chasing after?
Yep.
It's taking all those fundamentals that you take and you strategize and you put inside of your company, but now you're just taking it, you're removing it out of that, and you're just applying it to your family.
Exactly. Yeah. And think about when we see this, where the last parent dies or parents die, and the next, somebody has to deal with it. And usually it is an absolutely overwhelming process. Why? First of all, the emotional side of losing the people you love. But the second one is they're not used to all this stuff. What do I got to do here? What do I got to ooh. And it's just, so imagine again, from a corporation point of view.
And typically it's avoided too on the family side of things.
Oh yeah, 100%.
You avoid those conversations.
Yeah, 100%.
And when it's in your face, that's when you have to deal with it.
100%. So all of a sudden we're pushed into that spot right there. What I'd say, for the most part, not prepared, not even remotely prepared. It's a double whammy of overwhelming stuff. And then what do we do? And then you have, and I see this, I used to see it all in the financial planning world. Then we have people, and I'm telling you, you put $1 in front of somebody, they do some weird things, and they start attacking the money and everything because it's theirs to spend, and they,
yeah,
and it's
money solves money problems.
Right.
Like my favorite quote, you touched on it a little bit earlier from you, is when we were driving back from the Flames game. This was before Christmas time, and we were talking about like the hardships kind of from business and being able to go on some of these journeys. And I asked you, I was like, well, then why? Like, why do you put yourself in these situations? I'm like, you don't have to, but so why do you do it? And you look at me and you go, who do you think I am? You think I'm Scrooge McDuck? What am I going to do? Sit here and count my dollars on my deathbed? You're like, it's about the journey. It's about the stories. It's about what you do.
Mm-hmm. And it's about whether you think that you have people in the company, you would never put them in a position without preparing them for it. But we do that generationally to everybody. So there's no hope that these people can even have a reasonable outcome unless they're grounded like themselves. So
well, I think honestly, we don't even give them the opportunity to be able to take it over. We don't even have those conversations, right? Because even if I think about like what we're doing in the business, it's like I'm sitting down with each person and I'm saying, hey, like, what does the direction of your career look like? Like what actually do you really find attractive to being here? We don't do that in our families. We don't sit there and talk like with my sister, with my mom, with my dad, and say like, hey, what do you actually love about being a part of this family? Like, what is it that you want more of it? And what do you want to be able to continue where it's gone? Like, we've never had a conversation like that, but we have conversations like every single week inside of the company about that.
100%. And it's not weird. In the company, you go, it'd be weird if you didn't have the conversations. But when we go there, so think about congruency in your life. We do it this way. And this other one, we do the opposite. And we go, well, that seems kind of weird. It would be, so, what Joe was doing was he was just taking that view that says, look, this is what I've noticed with what I call generational wealth families and the people that build, and the names, if I throw out Rockefeller and all these names that you go, those are names you go, yeah, I know, Henry Ford, you go, Yeah, I know who that is. And then you go, but it's what they did and how they built this thing. And you know, like you go all the way down, like the McCain family, like you sit down and think about all of that, it just continues on. And so yes, and then yes, and sometimes the news, when you see that prominent name and the somebody derails, the best way for me to say it is at least they have a cliff to fall off of.
Hmm.
So the point is that, so this is what's been going through my mind, is saying, are we treating all of these assets, and I don't care what size an asset is. And this isn't like, okay, that sounds good, you have to have $100 million. Like you could have $50. Like my mom has nothing, but what she's missing is that the thing that it should have been is that all that generational information gets lost. And I remember I attended a seminar with a lady that created a book, and the book was really like, let's say 500 questions, and it just basically asks you everything from childhood all the way through, very similar to that book that was on that coffee table that just was done professionally. But this was just a book that you write it down.
So ironically, I actually got my mom one of those books for Christmas last Christmas, because like that's something actually I really care about.
Right.
Like I want to be able to go back and like read some of her memories as a kid, like read some of the memories of the different portions of her life, especially like when she passes away, like that's going to be so valuable to me.
100%. No, so there it is. So that was about creating, but it's very interesting how we have to almost, I don't want to say manufacture it, but it's just not a natural thing. But I would argue that maybe in those generational setup families, it's more of a natural thing because they already know. They respect the generation before, they're doing it. And even in North America, like we do something that's very different than in European families and even Asian families where the grandparents live with you, and all of that knowledge and that is passed on in. That's the thing that's been going through my mind when I see my mom scrambling for write a story down at this stage. I would like to have believed that it was incumbent on them. And I'm not, there's no regret, there's no remorse, there's no anger, there's no animosity, there's nothing directed toward my parents. It's more to do with, but it was incumbent on them to set that foundation, and they didn't. So then that's okay. Now, here we are, now the next generation. So then is it incumbent on me to set that there, to try to at least try to shape that, right? You know?
So two things going through my mind. The first is where do all the other relationships in your life fall apart of this, right? It's like, because like you talk about friends and family, we're really talking about families, we're talking about the last name, but it's like, where do the other relationships fall apart or fall inside of this, right? And then the other thing that's going through my mind too is, this has obviously been something on your mind quite a bit lately, is this something that you're going to like take action towards? Because as we're talking about this, like I have things going through my mind that I can actually start taking action on right now.
So I did go to the one sister that has tried to do that very thing in her own way, to try to be sort of the central spot for the family. And I acknowledge it. First of all, I thank them for being beside me and supporting me all the way through my journey. And then I also recognize that you've been doing that. And I told them about the legacy I've been thinking about, and that, you know, the first generation doesn't lay it. So somebody has to, at some point, somebody has to go, we're going to sacrifice and do this stuff. Because it's easier, like, as you know, like all of us could sit here and a year could go by and we have no connection to the family. We could say, we're having a family dinner or whatever. So let's say you decided to go, oh, I'm going to host a family dinner. To me, that's a sacrifice. You don't have to do it, everybody, because it's easier not to do any of this stuff. So then when you do that, you're trying to be the central point, and you have to deal with all of it and coordinate and all that. And they go, well, why do you do that? Because it must be a lot of work. Well, sacrifice is a lot of work. It's what are we sacrificing for the people, friends, family? What are we sacrificing to pour that foundation, whether it's corporately or personally, so that the next generation or the people coming behind, and how tall are we standing so that when they do step on the shoulder, it's high versus we're laying on the ground, there really isn't shoulders to step on.
Yeah, well, I think that is the big thing, is sacrifice and like the energy and time that you put into it. Because we've had conversations in the past about how people are hardwired and how people act in a certain way, right? So if you take, say, let's just say, let's take family. Let's make up a situation where you have people surrounded you inside of your family that are just like hardwired against the philosophies that you have, right? So it's like, are you taking the time, so say you want to have that generation, right? That 10 generations of family. Well, now are you actually sacrificing and spending that energy in the wrong direction just because like you're romanticizing being
Right.
the second generation or being
Right.
the third generation, right? Like, I think that's actually a good way to think about it is like, what is the first generation of the thing that you're building? Because you talked about second and third generation business owners that basically come in and be able just to have the handouts and they don't necessarily make the companies better.
Nope.
But it's like, say you are the second generation or the third generation or whatever it has to be, right? Because there's been tons of people that came before us. But what is the first generation of the thing that I'm building, and how am I adding the layer to that?
Yep.
Because like, even if it is, say, like trauma, right? Because there's a lots of trauma when it comes to families and relationships, and let's say like, hey, maybe the first step that I'm setting here is just being able to fix this one spot, right? And so, you know what, to me, that's enough to be able to have the second generation be able to kind of step on top of that
100%.
and then be able to tell better stories going forward. Because I think that's the big thing that comes to my mind is like, because you said it is hard and it is sacrifice, because honestly, it would be easier to go out and talk to 1,000 people and find the group of people that already have similar philosophies and build that generational thing with them versus sacrificing and being that central point that then connects these dots.
Yeah, and I think that, to me, that fixing that you use, I always have for me, I struggle with that one because to me, it's about creating a foundation of consistency so that they can see the mirror to take the steps to fix them. If I'll use the term fix themselves, if that's what they need to do. But to me, it's being realistic about just because you lay the foundation doesn't mean that people are going to stand on or stand on your shoulders. That there's those two or not. But it's just, I still view it, come back to it's incumbent to lay the foundation. It's just like, how do we know, like we see companies here like that are on the landscape for 50, 30, 40, 50, 100 years here. But I could throw up names and you go, I've never heard of that. And that's because they came and went in 5 years or 7 years or 10 years, or no, they had a good company. And then they, I remember there was a little grocery store that was on the north side. And it was one that was recognized in the neighborhood. It was there. And you could argue today that, well, that with the Costco's of the world, it wouldn't be there. But but they were immigrants to Canada, and the family had built that and set that up. And then I knew one of the sons, and next thing you know, he's busted for cocaine use or whatever. And I'm like, and that's all I thought of. It was, I felt sorry for him in one sense, but not really, because he chose that path. But I felt sorry for his dad that came and did that and had his name on that store and was building that thing for the family. And the son decided to basically piss it all the way down the road and like wreck the whole thing. So that's really where I still, to this day, when I drive by that's what I think of, not what the son did, because that's the son. But he was saying, I'm going to set and give them a chance. And what they do with the chance, that you can't control that. You don't like, so to me, it really has been top of mind. And I think it's because of all these different sort of things in the universe that are overlapping. But it's interesting that I don't believe we truly give that kind of education. Even the financial people that do it, I can pass it on tax-wise better. They do what I call surface stuff. And that's great, and that's better than not doing it. But they don't deal with that, and I think that's been missing. I've never seen really like seminars or things on that very subject. This is how you need to do it. Who's ready to sacrifice and lay this out, right? And so,
well, I think it's really easy to also point fingers, because I like the consistency that you're talking about is like, what can I do? What can I control? What can I sacrifice to be able to lay this? Because even just something, say, like financial education, right? It's like, well, that's really easy. A lot of people I've seen just point at the school divisions and say, like, they should teach that in school. Why don't they teach that in school? instead of saying like exactly what you're saying here, it's like, well, why don't we just teach that in our families? Like
exactly.
if I care about that and that's
Yeah.
led success inside of my life,
Right.
why don't I just teach that to my family?
Right. And there's people that I know that don't want their kids in the public system or whatever, so they homeschool. Okay, that's great. But why can't we go and say, okay, that's the base curriculum they're given in the public. I'll provide the home generational, a sacrifice, understanding the stewardship of anything, any asset that we come across, and laying that foundation. And that's what we can do in controlling the home. And the problem with that is even the teaching, this is the one where you have to basically live your life that way. So, so again, think about what you would have to live your life and the sacrifice you do to lay that out, and whether the kids do anything with it or not. But I think most people are just scrambling. They're like, what the heck are you talking about? Like, and
yeah,
so
your first book was Vision Meets Execution. Maybe the second book is Foundation Meets Family.
Well, there you go. There you go. Copyrighted quick. Yeah. So I don't know. I know there's a lot about, family breakdown and everything and what it does to society, but I think it's also about how we build those roots and build that out, and what sacrifices do we do to position ourselves, and more importantly, to position the next generations to have an opportunity, and then see what they could do with it. And I've witnessed 1, 3, 4 generations that's done an extraordinary job, and I was in awe, let's put it that way. And a lot of things don't impress me, but that impressed me. So yeah, so very interesting.
Yeah, no, I think that is amazing. I think it's a great concept because, yeah, I'm just thinking about like the sacrifice. Like honestly, I think the hardest sacrifice is just like opening up the conversations to this. Like I think that's the hardest thing to do, right? To be able to sit down and be able to say like, hey, this is the path that we're on. It's like we can continue down this path, or we can have these hard conversations, and we can try to set up this structure and this foundation in place to be able to take the family to the next level, or to be able to build or lay that foundation.
Yep.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
Anchors up!
Time to set sail.